Good afternoon, or let's hope it is, because it was anything but a good morning. No less than 4 red flags for 5 big names crashing out in FP1. We had Jonathan Ray at turn 8, Andrea Iannone at the final turn, Remy Gardner followed him, Nicolo Bulock at turn 6, and finally Andrea Locatelli spill at turn 17. That brought an end to a painful session. Second time lucky, hopefully in free practice 2. And Steve English alongside me. Before we get into the detail of each of those crashes, really unprecedented in our Premier class to have so many big incidents and several factors involved in what was ultimately something of a demolition derby this morning.
Yeah, we saw this morning just so many crashes. Speaking to teams after the session, they all seem to agree on certain elements causing the crashes. There was, obviously after the overnight rain, there's a little bit of lack of grip out the racetrack. You've had it where some of the gravel ends up just getting dragged around a little bit more than you'd like. You have it where you've got cold temperatures out here, you've got a big wind, you've got hard tyres. There's lots of circumstances have led to the morning that we had, but it's also created a lot of uncertainty for everyone now because they don't know how the track will be this afternoon. And the track conditions, not that dissimilar to what we had this morning. We've just had a big shower over the lunchtime break. And for all the teams and the riders when they were in getting their lunches and their hospitality units, they heard massive clashes of wind and crashes of wind against the side of the buildings, and it just went to show just how changeable the conditions are, because as you look at it on screen, it looked quite pleasant here.
Yeah, when I went up to lunch, everyone was cowering from the hail. I went purposefully on, of course, to make sure I got fed before we got back underway this afternoon, and free practice 2 now about to emerge. But no doubt about it, the crashes were the big stories of free practice 1, and we've got to start at the top with the biggest of them all, the World Championship leader, Nicolo Bulock, 34 points ahead of top-ranked Razgatlioglu, remember, and a turn 6 spill that could have been very nasty for him indeed.
Yeah, speaking to people in the media centre that saw Bulock as he was coming out from the medical centre after his check-up at the end of this crash, and they said that he looked anything but fit as he was walking up through the paddock. You can see how big the impact was for him, but also just how quickly that snaps around to take him out of control of the bike. And such a rare crash. We don't see big high sides like this anymore, and we saw a lot of them in this morning's sessions. Bulock has a right ankle injury, he's got a left knee injury, and you wouldn't be too surprised if when he wakes up tomorrow morning there's a lot more of him that's stiff and sore.
Yes, the main thing is, though, he is past and he is back in the pit lane. Saw photos of him walking down pit lane looking decidedly worse for wear when he came back. So that will have been after the journalists saw him leaving the media centre. So it'll be interesting to see what he does actually in free practice 2 this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll see how many laps he ends up putting in. And the big thing for the riders is that when you get back in on track at the end of a session like that, and you get yourself back out after an injury, your adrenaline takes over and he'll be able to do his full job through the course this afternoon. But the problem with that is then at the end of the session, when you finish up the day, when you go back to the motorhome afterwards, when you rest up, you have to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. But you have to do it so often in a superbike class because you've got 3 races over the course of the weekend. You've got the Super Bowl session as well tomorrow. It's a lot of high pressure situations.
Top-ranked Razgatlioglu all smiles by contrast. Completed free practice 1 fastest of anyone by over half a second. Of course, that session stopped prematurely in the end. What was it, 4 minutes from the end of the session, ahead of Danilo Petrucci and Alvaro Bautista. News on the other riders who crashed out earlier on today, and unfortunately one of them is withdrawn. Andrea Iannone is out, 2 broken toes on his right foot after his crash at the final turn 21, and again, big spill here for Andrea Iannone.
Yeah, and you can see as well for Iannone just how quickly the rear comes around on him and just catches him out. But again, the uncommon nature of seeing a big vicious high side like this. Sometimes you go a full season without seeing riders having big crashes like this, and instead we saw so many of them this morning.
And of course Remy Gardner went in subsequently to that with Andrea Iannone down as well, so quite an awkward situation there, and again that was another stoppage.
Yeah, and for Remy's crash, speaking to people within Yamaha, they said that he had eased off and had come through there, and just the bike spun up on him as well and crashed him off. So he had gone through, he had seen the yellow flags, he had seen the marshals, he had closed the throttle, and he had an off-throttle high side. So not an awful lot that he can do about that if that's the case. But a lucky escape as well, because once you've got marshals out on the racetrack trying to deal with one bike, if another bike comes down, it's obviously a situation that could go wrong very quickly.
Alvaro Bautista finished third fastest earlier on today. Top Ducati was Danilo Petrucci in P2. We did ultimately finish the morning with 4 Ducatis in the top 5 places. So again, no great surprise, but Ducati running well thus far here at the Autodrom Most.
Yeah, Ducati is strong as you'd expect, and obviously here in Most we've seen it where the likes of Bautista's had a lot of success. Bulock with his injury after this morning's session. It'll be interesting to see how he reacts from that. Ducati have had Petrucci in good form, Lowe's in good form, so they should all be at the front as well.
As you can see, harder tyre allocation this weekend. The SC1 with the 2 development options is the race tyre, and SC0 of course also available during your free practice sessions, but harder tyre allocation this weekend in Most. Cooler track temperatures, the wind, you know, there's so many factors as to why it's been a difficult day so far, and it's not necessarily going to be straightforward in the early minutes of this free practice too either, because the super sport times, even by the end of the session, were 4 seconds off the lap record in that Super Pole session. So you're still going to have to be a little bit careful, a little bit cautious of those curves and white lines.
Yeah, it didn't look like Toprak was being too cautious as he came out of the pits there. Didn't have a big stoppy in turn 1 there. But for the riders, they've seen the Super Sport session. They saw that obviously you went out slicks at the end of it. Everyone got faster and faster. But the problem is the hard tyre we're having to use this weekend. After the problems we had here in Most a few years ago, was decided you couldn't use that softer tyre. But we're here much earlier in the year now, so the track conditions are very different. So we've got 18 degrees track temperature right now, and you're out there with that harder tyre. This is the same tyre we used for Phillip Island with 60 odd degrees track temperature, and you're having to deal with that around very different racetracks, so it's a big challenge for everyone.
Yes, let's hope it shakes up the order a little bit and provides some more front runners this weekend as we catch up with Andrea Locatelli and Jonathan Ray. And it was unfortunately a double spill for the 2 Pata Yamaha riders. Jonathan Ray going earlier in the session and missing a lot of running, so very costly for him.
Yeah, it really was, and a big crash for Johnny. He was lucky that he didn't get collected by the bike. He was lucky he didn't get spat off the bike, but he lost out in pretty much the whole of FP1, and for Ray, it's not really time that he can afford to lose.
5 riders onto track and straight back in, and 3 of them had crashes earlier on today, and that won't be a coincidence. Remy Gardner, we already talked about. Jonathan Ray with his spill, and Andrea Locatelli. Now, he didn't miss out on any running because his crash right at the end there was the one that forced the last red flag and ultimately the abandonment of the session, but spill for him too at turn 17.
Yeah, let's see what the track conditions are like now at Sam Lowe's. Runs across the curb there on the entry to the corner, so he's got a lot of confidence that it's pretty dry conditions out of that part of the racetrack. This is down in towards turn 10 as well, the 65 kilometers an hour right-hand hairpin, and from this point on, Most really does open up. And you can see here for for Jari Montella at the end of the lap, just how much faster it is in this part of the track than it is at the start of the track. So we'll see what the lap times are when everyone starts to put in something representative for them. The first times we have in around about 6 seconds slower than we had in this morning's free practice session, but let's see what Montella is able to do when he comes across the line. Yeah,
latest track report we had before we got underway with this session was that there were still patches of water between turns 6 to 10. We did see on board that was a little bit damp, certainly offline for the riders making their way through. They were right on board with Sam Lowe's, and Sam just making his way now through the final sector. Garrett Gerloff, the first rider to set a time in this session, and it is a 1 minute 39.522, but Sam should be not more than 2 seconds faster than that, so some decent pace right from the early minutes of free practice.
Yeah, just to give it a little bit of representativeness, Sam was a 32.5 this morning, so still around 5 seconds slower than that right now, so those damp patches still causing some issues in the middle of the lap, but riders aren't going to be pushing on too hard in those first couple of laps. You build into the sessions.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say, that you're not going to take any risks on your first lap of FP2 anyway. Scott Redding after 2 completed sectors, 1.2 seconds up, so the time is going to be found quite quickly here in FP2. As you say, Sam Lowe's 137.469. Redding about to go, 2 seconds faster, just making his way through the final sector. Gerloff is up as well, so the more laps they put in, the more confidence they find. At the moment, the limiting factor is probably the confidence and the unwillingness to have an incident more than it is the track conditions themselves, as Redding crosses the line 1 minute 34.933, and that's much more like it as well, 2.5 seconds faster than Lowe's went before.
Yeah, and around about that second and a half slower than he had been this morning, and you can see certain parts of the track look like there's quite good grip there. At the end of the lap, you could see Redding immediately dragging his elbow through that part of the track. He's got a lot of confidence to throw the bike onto the side of its tyre down here in the first sector. It was the middle sector in the Super Sport session that really took a long time to dry, and that's also where we're seeing riders not really finding lap time right now at the start of this session. So we'll keep an eye on that as the session progresses.
Yeah, that's the southwestern side of the circuit, and that's where the areas of the track were that were wettest, as you say, in the Super Sport session, and also where they notified before the session started that there were still some damp patches out and about. So free practice 2 continuing. We catch up with the promoter of Alex Lowe's. He and Axel Bassani, fresh from the announcement that they will continue on next season, of course. So we see Zakwan Zidi, having gone down himself in free practice 2 in the early minutes of this session. Still finding his feet in World SBK, of course. And here he's being passed by Scott Redding.
And he gets pushed out onto the damp patch there, so not really an awful lot Zidi could do there.
Yeah, a little bit spooked as well, and as Redding comes through on the inside of him, he's wider than he wants to be, and down he goes. A narrow line, of course, because it's been generated by the passage of the bikes going through the Supersport session.
Yeah, the unfortunate reality of it is Zidi has just been so slow for much of the season that riders don't want to get caught behind him. So for Scott Redding, he didn't want to wait to come past him. He wanted to make sure he was the one forcing the issue there, and comes down the inside, doesn't do anything wrong, but Zaidi's then left with nowhere to go but over that damp patch, and it leads to a crash.
So Zidi coming down has remounted. He's making his way, we'd assume, back towards the pits. Redding is out there improving 134.159 last time around, ahead of Gerloff, Montella, Sam Lowe's, Eggerter, Vierke and Zidi are the other riders who have put in their lap times. Tito Rabat's the only other rider out on the circuit at the moment. So basically the rider's saying, well, this early on, there's probably not much to learn. The track still needs to dry a little bit. I'll save tyres and use the rest of the time in this session.
Yeah, and definitely for riders, it just comes down to how they want to use their allocation of tyres through the course of the sessions. Those goes to the top of times there. That's about 9/10 slower than he went this morning. We're only 7 or 8 minutes into this session as well, but he's just trying to find that confidence and keep doing what he's been doing over the last few rounds.
Yeah, lap time like that, though, as you say, only a second off what he was able to post for P4 in FP1 earlier on today. It shouldn't be long now before the rest of the riders make their way out onto track.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone will be able to see that and get a lot of confidence from what they're seeing those do. And what's interesting to see how Sam's riding there is you can see just how little he's leaning that bike down compared to the likes of Scott Redding we saw dragging his elbows. Obviously, Scott has a lot more leverage than Sam Lowe's. He's a lot taller than him. But Lowe's just looking pretty comfortable out there as he's building up into the session. He's not trying to put the bike under too much strain really at this stage. And you can see though it still moves around a lot underneath him. And I think for Lowe's, what we've seen through the course of the season so far is when the bike's moving around, he always feels pretty happy with it and confident in it. And they've been able to make a big step forward with what he needs the bike to do.
Important thing, of course, in these early minutes of the session is just not to have an incident, to make sure that you get plenty of laps in and get your way through to when the track conditions will be optimal as the session goes on. Looks like another couple of tenths potentially here for Sam Lowe's this time around. We didn't talk much about Sam earlier on today, but what a brilliant recent run it's been for him. 2 top 5 finishes on Sunday in Assen, 2 top 5 finishes on Sunday in Cremona. Of course, the first podium in Assen, the second place in the Superpole race. And even at the start of the season, you know, he had a top 6 in Portimao, 2 top 6s in Phillip Island. So brilliant job so far for Sam Lowe's, up in 6th in the championship and leading that secondary group. Yannone behind him, the likes of Vierke, Vandermark, Redding, all behind him in the championship point scoring, a third of the way through the season now.
Yeah, when you look at the season so far, obviously there was the crash in Portimao, but that was almost the teams will always call it a performance crash, where you're trying to push on to get onto a podium spot. There was the crash with Bautista in Assen as well. So one mistake so far for those through the course of the first third of the season, and I think that shows the steps and the progress that he's made.
Scott Redding's just gone P1 faster than he went in FP1 earlier on today. So track conditions is not something we need to worry about too much unless you end up offline, and then you're in a little bit of trouble. But Redding leads the way. First rider to go faster than he went in FP1 earlier on today, and that's representative then.
Yeah, and you can see here for Nicola Bulock, not in a hurry to get himself out in the racetrack. You can see he doesn't have his gloves or his helmet on, or the team don't seem particularly stressed about trying to get that bike ready. And a big reason for that is if Top Rack's not going out, if your championship rivals aren't going out, is there a big benefit to gain whenever you've been knocked up a little bit in that crash this morning? So for Bulock, he'll wait it out another while longer until Top Rack goes out on track, and then you'd imagine he'll head on out.
His teammate Alvaro Bautista is making his way out onto the circuit. As you can see, Sandros continues to go faster and faster, only a tenth slower now than he went in FP1 earlier on today. So Samlo certainly down to pace, as is Scott Redding, and Jari Montella has improved on his FP1 time. So time for the rest of the field to get underway. The BMWs have gone out together. Razgat, Lioglu and Vandermark just completing their installation lap. Bahatin Sofoglu is out there around the same part of the circuit as well. And then we've seen Alvaro Bautista making his way out onto the circuit. Vickers came out with Bautista. Locatelli is out there as well, as is Taz McKenzie. So more and more riders now joining this free practice too.
Yeah, everyone just getting themselves ready to head on out. This is Garrett Gerloff we see coming across, and Gerloff should post up his fastest time of the weekend so far on this lap as well. And again, another rider that's been able to go faster than he went in this morning's session. So that again just gives another illustration of where the tracks are right now as well, as Gerloff struggles to get the bike stopped in towards turn 1. And Garrett's had a really tough time adjusting to that Kawasaki and being able to get the most from it. It's a very different riding style to the Yamaha or the BMW, and that's where, from this point on in the season, this is where he really needs to have his good results as well, because we come to some of the racetracks where he's had good results and good form in the past.
Yeah, this season, those 3 12th place finishes, the best of his results, still hasn't really knocked on the door of the top 10. And at this time of year, when he's not going to be among the first perhaps to start discussing what the future will hold, but when that conversation does come around, you have to feel that thus far it's been a backward step for him to ride for Kawasaki, even if it's a factory team in name. And then next season is a big uncertainty for a rider who, if you are the official Kawasaki team, you can't accept being outside of the top 10 from one round to the next. So unless Gerloff can turn that around, they're going to surely be looking at making a change, and then that means Gerloff's got to find somewhere else to go. Yeah,
the unfortunate reality for riders are that as you start to slip further and further down the pecking order, it gets more and more difficult to move us back up the grid, and Gerloff's a good case in point of that. His form in the GRT Yamaha really showed how good of a rider he can be. Went to the Bonovo team and had some podiums at the end of last season, but it didn't really click into place to show what he could fully do with that bike. And then you move further down again, and it just becomes more and more difficult to be able to give yourself that opportunity to be on a better bike and be able to get the results. And that's where it's a very slippery slope for riders. And when you get to the silly season for the midfield of the grid, you have to think about, if you're the team manager, who do you want to have on your bike? And if you're the rider, do you want to be on that bike? And Gerloff, if he decides that he wants to go back to racing Moto America, he'll have his pick of his rides there to be able to win races, challenge for a championship again. Or does he want to stay in World Superbikes? And what are his prospects to be on a better bike than the Kawasaki with Pacetti right now?
So Alvaro Bautista just making his way through the final turn. I did briefly mention his comments yesterday back in FP1, where he talked about now just waiting to see what Ducati want next season. His intention is to continue on riding, and of course the carrot of a new bike for Bautista. I think at this point that's the hope for him, isn't it, that it brings him back to where Nicolo Bulock is at the moment, because there's been precious little sign that Alvaro has been able to make the same step that Bulock has this winter.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, for Alvaro, despite being a 2-time world champion, he's very much the number 2 rider at Ducati, and he's going to continue to be that number 2 because Bulock is the present and the future for that manufacturer. And that's where Bulock's contract's quite interesting. There's a lot of talk in the Italian media, well-placed journalists in the Italian media, that have said that Bulock has already been promised a test on the 2027 MotoGP bike in May. And whenever there's specific details like that, it's because it's already been agreed upon. So Bulock's contract looks all but certain to be signed, announced in all likelihood next time out in Misano, and it's going to include some MotoGP tests. They're trying to give him the carrot of, we might put you on a MotoGP grid down the line, and that's enough to keep him happy and keep him at Ducati.
It's not a great moment for the riders in the rider market, is it? It's a great moment for the manufacturers, because if you're Ducati, you can call Bullock's bluff to some extent and say, well, we've got Bautista, and at the same rate, you could go to Bautista and say, well, we're not bothered, we've got Bulock. And of course, if they call your bluff, you've got the pick of everyone else, because your bike's the best one out there. 4 of the top 5 earlier on today. Look at all of them with the podium finishes and the results they've had thus far this season, including the independent Ducatis. So good negotiating point, I think, as far as costs are concerned for Ducati ahead of next season.
Yeah, and it's a really strange situation, because if you want to win in World Superbikes, in all likelihood you need to have a Ducati. If you want to challenge as another manufacturer, you need to have this man, Toprak Razgatlioglu. Obviously enough, you can still end up where you can have some outlier results. Alex Lowe's won a couple of times in Phillip Island last year, Locatelli's won this year, but by and large you need to be on that bike or have that rider to be able to challenge, and that's where the strength right now lies with either Toprak or Ducati to decide so much about the future. And Toprak is the rider that's going to decide the future here, but what's interesting is it's actually MotoGP riders that will decide Toprak's future. So Toprak doesn't really have any power in the MotoGP paddock to be able to force a decision. So is he going to wait it out to try and get himself a MotoGP seat, or will he end up just having to sign his future just because he doesn't want to wait much longer? And that's what becomes interesting for Toprak.
Well, the good thing for Toprak is that in this paddock, everyone will be willing to wait for him. You're going to keep a slot open right up until the moment that you know you've not got any chance of having Toprak on your bike, because he's the man who has been able to make the difference. He's delivered BMW their first ever World Championship. He's ended Yamaha's barren spell prior to that. So I think pretty much anyone up and down this paddock would like to get Toprak on their bike.
Yeah, by all accounts, Toprak was paid €1 million as his bonus for winning the championship last year, and the money that they spent on Toprak was the best money BMW have ever spent in World Superbikes, because he was the difference maker to allow them to win. And when you think about the cost that they've had over the years for this program, he's the key, and that's why they can't afford to lose him.
Just back to FP2 for a moment, because it looks as though Nicolo Bulock is making his way out and around the circuit. Now, Bulock, obviously we've already had Andrea Iannone withdrawn. Bulock is the man who had the big crash earlier on today, who hasn't yet set a time in FP2, while Razgatlioglu is out there pounding round and setting laps that are faster and faster. He leads the way at the moment, 1 minute 31.719. Petrucci with a good lap there has just moved into second place, 1:31.878. But here we pick up Nicolo Bulock, about to start his first flying lap of FP2.
Yeah, we saw Bulock leave the pits, and he looked a little bit stiff and sore as he was stretching on the bike to try and get himself comfortable. But this is the first time that we're actually seeing him out on track now as well, and we'll see what his lap times are, and we'll see how many laps he's able to put in. But there's a difference between being hurt and being injured, and Bulock is hurting right now, but he's able to at least get out there and see how it feels on the bike. And obviously enough for Bulock, if it's too much in a session like this, he still has the chance to be assessed tomorrow as well, so it's not a case of ruling yourself out at any stage. He'll just try and get as many laps in as he can this afternoon to make sure everything's in the ballpark.
Does it just change the context of the weekend though significantly, because it goes from being trying to beat Toprak, trying to extend your leading margin, to, oh my goodness, I've turned up at Toprak's best track and now I've taken a big knock on Friday, I've lost a lot of running, I'm not fit enough, and now it's Bulock on the back foot, and Bulock needing to some extent to defend that championship lead.
Well, the one thing is, it's very difficult to look past a 62-point haul for Toprak this weekend, regardless of what Bulock does, because this is one of his best tracks. We've seen him have such good performances here. Even when you think about those races up against Alvaro Bautista, whenever he had to just do everything he could to try and get in front and stay in front of Bautista. So for Toprak, you'd expect that this weekend is a hat-trick waiting to happen. And for Bulock, after the crash, after the injury, that's where he then needs to try and recover from that. And his goal has to be that damage limitation, regardless of what happened to him, because you know the Toprak's going to have those strong performances and a lot of potential for good results. For Bulock, we'll just wait and see how he fares over the course of this session as well. There's nothing to gain by going out there and riding really hard at this stage and risking everything. So for Bulock, this is just about trying to just survive through this session.
Yeah, find some way to be comfortable on the bike, work out what you can and can't do at this stage. 25 minutes remaining in free practice 2. Razgatlioglu leads the way. 1 minute 31.445, so he's now gone faster than he went earlier on today. It was 1:31.687 for P1 and FP1. Good work again from the Bimotor riders. Bassani up to P3 and Alex Lowe's up to P4. We have seen Good Friday results for Bimotor, but it hasn't always transferred into race results, has it? So they'll be hoping that this weekend they can actually continue on, have good Superpole sessions and then get some big points on the course.
Yeah, their problem so far this season has been very clear to see. They're slow through the speed trap, and if you're giving up time on the straights, it's very difficult to make that time up everywhere else, and it's free lap time to give away, and that's where they need to find their improvements. And if they're able to qualify well, at least you're able to stem the bleeding a little bit, but it's so difficult to defend for a 35-minute race whenever you're giving up, say, 10 kilometers an hour through a speed trap.
And the reality is they haven't been able to generally hook up the Superpole sessions, have they? Alex Lowe's such a good qualifier over his time on the Kawasaki, certainly, and then finds himself struggling to make it up onto the third row of the grid. Obviously had misfortune in one of the rounds as well. Axel Bassani did have one good Superpole session. That was in Assen, wasn't it? Second row of the grid for him there. But generally the trend has not been great. And then to make up positions when you've got a top speed deficit is even more difficult than defending them.
Yeah, and that's the challenge really for them right now, and I think that's where we've been able to see how good of a job both Bassani and Lowe's have done through the course of the season so far in terms of how they're riding, but the results just haven't quite been there. The project's very new and they're still trying to figure out what they're able to do with it. I think it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over the course of the next year, really, as they get super concessions. How do they use them? When we get through to the next checkpoint for super concessions, will they start to give themselves something that will give them a little bit of engine performance? I think they've lost quite a few of the concessions they had whenever they were with Kawasaki last year.
Axel Bassani making his way into the pits at the end of his first stint. 1 minute 32.003 for Bassani, sits in 5th place, and Alex Lowe's directly behind him at the moment, remains on the circuit. He's in 6th. Xavi Vierke just posting his personal best and up into 7th position, and Andrea Locatelli in 4th. Very early to read too much into the weekend at this stage, but Andrea Locatelli seemingly none the worse for wear for his spill earlier on. As we watch this slow motion through turn 1 with Sam Lowe's.
Yeah, turn 1, obviously we see the big heavy braking zone into there that Toprak makes into his own, but the change of direction was quite a challenge for the riders here, and there's a couple of seams for them to come across. That was a big problem whenever we first came to Most, and led to a lot of issues, but this section of track, it's been able to evolve a little bit over the years and improve, but certainly there's a few places through it where there's little bumps and rivets, and it's a big challenge for the riders to be able to feel comfortable through this section. You can see for Bulock as he comes through, and last time around Bulock was able to get himself down into the 32s again, so he's just getting progressively faster lap by lap, and he's around about a second slower than Toprak right now. But the big thing for Bulock is that he's looking relatively comfortable on the bike, and obviously enough after the crash this morning, it's just about trying to see how he can maneuver himself around on the bike and how natural he looks out there.
Yes, seeing turns 1 or 2, obviously, you know, highest brake pressure of the season in towards turn 1, big top speed, straight just under 800 meters long, and then heavy braking, and then the slowest corner on the circuit, turn 2, at just 60 kilometers an hour. So it's a big pinch point in the early laps. We have often seen incident there. We also sometimes see riders running on at turn 1, even later in the race, struggling to get the bike stopped. So it's a crucial area to make, but most importantly to potentially lose races.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of riders during the course of the free practice sessions going in a little bit hot into turn 1, and you can see the issue here for Bulock as it comes across the line. 295, 300 k's an hour down into the braking zone. Look how hard you have to snap the throttle, so get on the brakes, and then scrub off all that speed down to around about that 60 k's an hour through there. So you're having to scrub off 230, 240 k's an hour really down into that section, and you're doing it all in the space of just those couple of hundred meters. So once you've got any sort of a bump, or you break in that meter too late or a couple of meters too late, it's then very difficult to get the bike stopped to peel across the track in towards turn 1, and that's where it's so easy to tuck the front through there.
20 minutes remaining in free practice 2 as we ride another onboard lap of this Autodrom Most. Let's head down to Liam Hodgins in pit lane.
Thank you very much. That's good afternoon to everybody. Down in pit lane outside the Patio Yamaha box with Nicolo Canapa. Nicolo, a bit of a difficult morning for Yamaha and he crashed with Joey Locka and of course Remy over GYRT. Could you just tell us how the riders are feeling after the morning's crashes and what the run plan is for this afternoon?
Yeah, well, it's been a tough FP1, but luckily Johnny and Locka, they feel okay, and they already are lapping quite good at the moment. Remy is a bit in pain. He had some pain on his right foot, but hopefully it's going to be better tomorrow, you know.
Yeah, and of course, looking at the pit boards, Johnny's currently on a 9-lap run at the moment. Locka is just on a very good run, setting P5 at the time being. How is the performance right this morning? Tell, but this afternoon seems a little bit better.
Yeah, well, it's a track where usually one works pretty well, and Locka went to the podium already here before. Johnny's been always competitive, so I believe we can perform good. We have to see the track condition because this morning was very difficult, and also this afternoon at the beginning was not that great, but the track is getting better and better.
And of course for Johnny missing out most of the session, this crash happened. But of course for Johnny, as the bike just went past, Johnny missed out on a lot of the running in FP1. Is his session just all about getting out there, doing as many laps as possible and not really changing too much on the bike?
Yeah, I think for Johnny it's very important to do many laps to get the feeling back, especially after this morning crash. Yeah, let's see. But in general, he's always pretty fast from the beginning. He's a guy that doesn't need so much time for adaptation. He's immediately fast, so we're not worried about that.
Nicolo, thank you very much for talking to us and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, trying start to this weekend for Yamaha, isn't it? Ray, Locatelli, Gardner in particular, and a big spill for Remy in FP1 that Nicolo was alluding to there.
Yeah, and bumped into Remy just as I was heading down towards the commentary box at the end of the lunch break, and Remy was limping pretty badly really at that stage, so he did have a big impact after his crash, high side through the last corner, and hopefully for Remy it's still not a case of impacting him too much whenever he gets out there on the bike. Sometimes for a rider it's a lot more difficult as you're walking through the paddock rather than when you're in your boot and you're sitting on the bike and being able to move around out there. And for Remy, if it's his right foot, at least it's not as mission critical as his left foot, his gear change foot out there in his Yamaha.
Yes, that's the saving grace, as you say. Just while we're talking about injured riders, Bulock has now made his way back into the pits. So Bulock, 6 laps according to our timing screens. Obviously an out lap, an in lap. So very limited running in this free practice 2, but it's enough to know that he can get round on the bike, put himself 8 fastest in free practice 2. He's not going to be worried about the time. At this point, he's just going to be worried about the fitness. And we'll know the answer to that to some extent in Superpole, but really when we're underway with racing.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where the rider's able to take a few painkillers, they're able to grit it out, but you need to be careful when you take them, and that'll be before race 1 because you want to make sure that it doesn't wear out too quickly for you. And for the likes of Bulock, he'll know that in the Superpole session he just needs to make sure he'll put in 1 good lap and give yourself a chance to qualify relatively competitively. And if he wakes up tomorrow morning and he's really struggling, he just needs to make sure he's able to finish the races and score some points and not give up too much ground to Top Rack.
Yes, reality is, in terms of retirements or non-scores, you know, Top Rack had the 2 non-scores on Sunday in Phillip Island, Bulock had the 2 non-scores on Sunday in Assen, so they're pretty even there. It's been relatively even over the course of the season. 34 points is the gap. And 34, if you're not fully fit, if you're missing out on podiums, can be lost very quickly. So quite important for Bulock to be up on the podium because Top Rack has had those 3 second places in Cremona. You know, he had the win in the Superpole race in Assen. He had 3 wins in Portimao. He had the 2nd place in Phillip Island. So he has been notching enough podiums to make sure that Bulock's life is a little bit difficult on the day that something goes wrong, and today is the day that something's gone wrong. Yeah,
the 34 points between them is about right on the balance of what we've seen so far this season. A bit of bad luck for Bulock, obviously, in Assen. Top Rack had his bad luck in Phillip Island as well. So I think it's probably good value for where we've been for the first third of the season. But if Top Rack goes out with the kind of form he has shown so far this weekend, you certainly expect that he's going to be in a position to be able to win all 3 races this week. that really does put pressure on Bulock, and a different type of pressure than what he's had to deal with so far this season.
Is tyre life for Toprak something that will be in the back of our minds, or do we think that it's an Assen problem, as it was last year actually, when Toprak struggled to keep the tyre life in Assen?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where in Cremona he didn't really suffer too badly from it. Assen was quite warm. It's different conditions here. I think that what we've seen so far this weekend with all the crashes this morning is it's just going to be tricky for everyone out there, and that was with lots of different manufacturers. You had the Yamahas, you had 2 Ducatis with their crashes, and plenty of other instances for a few other riders where, you know, it can happen out there. And for Toprak and for BMW, though, they know that this is one of the better tracks for them. Toprak's riding really well this weekend. The one thing that they need is they need to see what Van der Mark can do as well. Van der Mark, 19th fastest in this session. We haven't really seen him put in any sort of lap times yet as well. He's only done half a dozen laps in this session. But for Toprak and for BMW, they know that they've just got to focus on their own job and making the right decisions. And Razgadioglu and Phil Marin, they don't tend to make too many wrong decisions.
Ikaleko crossing the line to set a 1 minute 32.065, enough for 8th fastest in this section, and on the combined times because everyone other than Michael Van der Mark has improved on what they did in FP1 earlier on today. Van der Mark is out on the circuit, so we'll be shortly underway. Let's take a look at the stint summary here with Toprak Razgatlioglu.
And there's the answer to your question about tyre life. So many 31s there for Toprak, and it looks pretty comfortable. A couple of 32s in there for Razgatlioglu. We did see he was behind Sam Lowes at the start of one of these laps as well, so he had to come past Sam, but still able to lap in those 32s. And when you look at the lap times, 32.0, Axel Bassani is 7th fastest with a 32.0, so Toprak's pace and consistency in this session, nothing to worry about that. Scott Redding that's gone down, and it looks like it's right at the end of the lap, the fast right-handers, so up around turn 20.
First big incident of free practice 2, and it's Scott Redding who has come to grief 13 minutes away from the end of the session, and this is how it happens.
Yeah, a little bit offline on the entry there, and Scott goes down, and obviously enough for Scott Redding, it's one of those crashes that could have been a lot worse, because you come off there very fast. It's 250 kilometers an hour down that straight in towards turn 20, and Redding just came off there, and at least for him, he's come off none the worse.
Yeah, it's not what he needs though, is it? This is the kind of weekend where he needs a clean, fast performance, and thus far we haven't seen a great deal. 15th at the end of FP1, 14th in FP2, and I'm afraid that's where he's been in recent rounds, roughly outside of the top 10 certainly.
Yeah, and for Redding, when you look at the forms of a couple of the other independent Ducatis, Petrucci and Lowes in particular, they've been able to step the game up this year. And Petrucci at the end of last year, the second half of last season, he was really consistent. Probably really from Most onwards last year, he looked really good. So for Petrucci, for Sam Lowes and the Mark VDS bike, they've shown what you can do as an independent Ducati team. Unfortunately for Scott Redding, we haven't really seen that outside of Phillip Island yet, and that's where he really needs to make his step. And Most is one of his traditional strong tracks, so it's a bit of a worry whenever he's down the order like he is.
Yeah, two 10th place finishes. I was going to say top 10, but 2 10th place finishes in the last 9 races over the 3 most recent rounds. So when we come here, when we come to Donington, when we go to Magny-Cours, those are all races that he really needs to pick up big points.
Just to say here about Van der Mark, you can see being held up by Remy Gardner, a little bit of frustration there for Mikey. He went 12th fastest. He'll lose that lap time because of the yellow flags for Scott Redding, but a 32.5.
Yeah, directly on the tail here of Remy Gardner, as you say. Gardner slower certainly than he might normally be, but he is still running his own free practice session, albeit slightly hampered after his spill earlier on today, as we heard earlier on. So I don't think there's too much in that, unless there was more before we joined it.
Well, you've got Remy a second off the pace in sector 1, 2 seconds off the pace the halfway stage of the lap. So for Van der Mark, he's obviously caught him at the wrong time, and it's just the bad luck of the session. But also these times don't count for anything either, so there's no real benefit to getting yourself frustrated.
Notification we've had from Race Direction is that Scott Redding's bike will not be recovered during this session. So it's session over for him, and free practice 2. The rest of it goes begging. Nicolo Bulock, meanwhile, is back out on the circuit. That is good news, isn't it? Because it would have been easy for Bulock to come out, do his 4 laps, go back into the pits, and then that's it for the session, and rest and come back out tomorrow. But he's obviously asked to go back out on the circuit and put in some more laps in FP2 this afternoon.
You can see there the bike's still moving around on the entry in towards those corners. That's where he had his crash. This is where he had his crash this morning. And still willing to push on and let the bike move around underneath him. And it's one of those situations where for Bulock, he wants to show that he's got that speed. And you can see on the timing tower on the left-hand side of the screen, a red sector through sector 1 for Bulock.
Yes, strong start to this latest lap. This would be quite something if he can propel himself up the order in FP2. Less than 10 minutes remaining, and Bulock is out there on his second stint at the moment. Axel Bassani just making his way through the final sector. Toprak Razgatlioglu on a very long run here. Leading the way in this session, 1:31.318 his fastest time. It's still only about half a second a lap away from that fastest time as well.
Let's see what he's able to do when he comes across the line at the end of this lap as well for Toprak, because his pace has been really consistent. We saw that graphic that showed that, and comes across the line at 32.2 this time around for Toprak. Lost a bit of ground in that final sector. Looks like he might have had Jonathan Ray, it looked like, in front of him on the track, so maybe a little bit of traffic there at the end of the lap for Toprak, but again, 32.2 is really impressive. Bulock now goes up to 4th position there with a mid-31 as well, and Van der Mark continues to improve as well, so good to be able to see Bulock do that. But Toprak, he's out there trying to make sure he's doing that full race simulation, and he's getting all the important information.
It's a bit of an ouch when Jonathan Ray is the traffic in front of you, isn't it? Ray in 12th position. That's the best we've seen thus far into his comeback, of course, still very early days. 1.1 seconds down on P1 Ray, and just starting his first flying lap of his, what you'd assume would to be his final stint. And Jonathan Ray not troubling the leaders as things stand. Toprak Razgatlioglu at the top of the timesheet, 1:31.318, and up on his latest lap, Steve Toprak. So going great guns once again. Van der Mark also set to improve on this latest lap, closing minutes as ever, and we'll keep you abreast of any late dashes up through the timing sheets. But certainly Toprak, who's had the margin on everyone else in free practice today. Nicolo Bulock's lap time last time around moves him up to P4, 3/10 back from Toprak.
Yeah, Toprak's going to be a very short price favourite going into tomorrow's race, and the Superpole session as well, as he comes across the line, and a 31.5, and faster than pretty much anyone else has gone at all this weekend as well. So for Sam Lowe's 31.5, only a few hundredths of a second faster than Toprak's 20th fastest time in this session, or 20th lap time in this session. So a full race simulation being done by Razgatlioglu and BMW, and I think given the way that their season has gone so far, that's going to really buoy their spirits.
Yeah, perhaps we need to buy our shares in Toprak after Assen and get our bets in for the Moss weekend. Yeah, well, I'm sure you probably did. Toprak Razgatlioglu, we practiced to still out there setting strong laps. He's bailed on this latest lap back into turn 1. We're watching Xavi Vierge. The Honda's relatively subdued in this session. Lecuona P10, Vierge P11. Normally we wouldn't say that's subdued. Normally we'd say that's sort of where they are. But last few rounds have been pretty good for the Hondas, and we'll see what Vierge can do here.
It's another one of those situations for Honda where Lecuona and Vierge are so closely matched, where there's only ever those couple of hundredths of a second a lap between them. Really, right now they've actually said the exact same fastest time in this session, but there's so little to choose between them. But the problem for Honda is, and we heard from Jose Escobar in the free practice 1 session, are they the two riders that are the best placed riders to lead that program forward? 4 years into them, we still don't know, and that's the big question for Honda. Both riders are good enough riders, but are they quite good what Honda need? Are they great riders? And that's the challenge that Honda face, because they've got the budget to be able to go out and hire a top tier rider, and you'd imagine that they'll hire one and keep one, but which do you keep, which do you lose?
The problem for them is that they tried various approaches, haven't they? They tried signing this man Alvaro Bautista as a top line rider, as the rider who'd been, world number 2 and title contender in 2019. Didn't work. They tried signing Leon Haslam at the same time. Experience, okay. Haslam had consistent results, more consistent than Bautista. Bautista had the high points with the 3 podiums over the 2 years. But you wouldn't say either of those signings particularly delivered what they wanted. They didn't continue moving forward in those 2 years. And then the Vierke and Lecuona, okay, they've each had a podium and they've knocked around the top 5, top 6 this season so far. But if the aspirations are higher, there's no point in keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. That's the reality.
That's the big thing for Honda, is that the bike is obviously not quite where it needs to be. But over the course of the next 2 years, are those the riders you need to have on it? And that's where, when the talk came out about Jack Miller having been offered a contract or being talked to, Jake Dixon apparently being offered a chance to talk to Honda as well, it's one of those situations where they're clearly looking for that next step forward. If you can go and hire a 10-year MotoGP veteran, a race winner like Jack Miller, it's a no-brainer to bring him in. If you've got the opportunity to bring in Jake Dixon from Moto2, if he views it that he's not going to get that MotoGP opportunity and he wants to come here, again, it's one of those things where his Grand Prix credentials are much higher than Vierge or Lecuona, and you can justify that change as well. If you keep Lecuona and Vierge, you're asking for more of the same. They're 2 very good riders, but Honda, they've been able to look at what BMW achieved by hiring a great rider like Bulock. Maybe that's what they need as well.
Michael van der Mark crossing the line, new personal best for him today, moving him up into 7th position, 131.899 for van der Mark. So 3/4 of a second covering your top 11 in this session this afternoon. Bit of a gap then to 12th place down, and honestly those riders from 12th place down have been generally those scrapping over the last of those points paying positions. Jonathan Ray's at the front of that secondary group at the moment in P12. Bulock is still out there and still lapping. Okay, he's not at his best, he's not at top racks level, but I think Bulock will be pretty pleased with how this session has gone, won't he?
I think he can be really pleased with it. He's going to do probably 16 laps, 15 laps by the end of this session. He's been able to put some good miles under his belt and be able to learn a lot from it and show that he's got a good base package around here. The bike's working well, and he'll feel that as long as he sleeps well tonight and is able to recover, that he's going to be able to go into the Super Bowl session feeling pretty good about himself.
3.5 minutes to go in free practice 2 then, and our final sprints with Alex Lowe's back out on the track now, currently 3rd fastest in this session for a final sprint in the closing moments. Toprak Razgatlioglu is back in the pits now. We're watching Bahattin Sofoglu, and we talked about him perhaps disproportionately this morning, but he did set a P9, and he was running up in the top 10 earlier on in this session as well. So look, okay, yes, in context, but it's been a decent day for Bahattin Sofoglu thus far.
Bahattin's a 10th of a second slower than Jonathan Ray, half a second slower than Locatelli. He's faster than Aguilar, he's faster than Gardner, he's faster than Tito Rabat, and he's doing a good job. Bahattin again showing this weekend that he very much is deserving of being a Superbike rider. Whenever he was hired by Moto X, I think a lot of people scratched their heads about it, and he's just been able to show that he's just going to knuckle down and do the hard work and get the most out of himself.
Yes, I think the whole of that rider lineup was a little bit of a surprise, to be perfectly honest. The Rabat signing was a bit left of field as well, but Sofoglu's a young rider, still improving, and although it's a big jump from Supersport to Superbike, I think for him to be up in the points, for him to be even close to the top 10 this weekend so far, I think that's good going. We see Andrea Locatelli crossing the line, 1 minute 31.928 from that.
I think part of the reason there was a bit of a head scratcher for Bahattin was that nobody knew where his options were going to be in the Supersport class. If he had been able to get himself onto the Yamaha R9, we've been able to see how good of a job it's done, and certainly if you had to put him onto the GMT 94 bike, let's say, he would have been able to do a very solid job there and challenge at the front. But he wanted to take on the chance of being a Superbike rider. I think the other option for him was to be on the Pichetti Kawasaki, and he wasn't too pushed to stick around for that option.
Yeah, there was most of the season the talk was, okay, Chanon Chu's going to move to Yamaha, and Bahattin Sofoglu will move to Kawasaki, as we see Sofoglu there moving up into 12th position, so now ahead of Jonathan Ray as well among the Yamaha stablemates. Ray just making his way around to start his final lap.
Just to say as well, at this stage of the session, you've got riders out for their last laps. We saw them come into the pits. I wouldn't be too surprised if a lot of them have gone out on the same tyres they used at the start of the session. They used one tyre for FP1, one tyre for FP2, and And if you've been able to do that, you've saved one of your stickers, one of your tyre allocation spots for if we've got changeable weather over the course of the weekend. That could play a key role. So if you're able to only use 2 tyres here on Friday, you've saved one option for later in the weekend. Typically, teams and riders will try and save one tyre for a red flag situation at the end of a weekend, but now they might be using it just in case of if it's wet, if it's dry.
Yeah, after free practice one, you just don't know what kind of weekend you're going to have, do you? Yeke crosses the line, 1 minute 32.014 for him. So 11 riders now covered by 3/4 of a second. This is Jari Montella. He'll get in one more lap after this. 20 seconds remaining on the clock. Montella P15. Subdued session from him thus far. His teammate Danilo Petrucci sitting in P6 again. Situation where we've got a lot of Ducatis in those top 6 places this afternoon.
Yeah, Ducatis in 2nd and 4th and 5th and 6th position, and it's no real surprise. The Ducati is the best package out there. It's the best bike out there, and they've got a lot of really good independent teams that get a lot of support from the factory, and that's where they're able to have these kind of results. But it's BMW leading the way. It's nice to see that Alex Lowe's and Bassani are up there inside the top 7 as well. Lowe's 3rd fastest on his Bimota, and then the slew of Ducatis there as well. And Van der Mark up there 8th fastest on his BMW, about a half a second slower than his teammate. But it looked like they were working very different programs out there, the 2 BMW riders.
Yes, so we make our way to the end of free practice 2. There wasn't really the final sprint, was there? As you said, nobody's too keen to use up tyres on a Friday in what's already been a tricky weekend. Interesting here to see Toprak Razgatlioglu followed around the circuit by Alvaro Bautista. There's been a Bautista flag waving in front of our commentary box through this free practice 2 session so far. But Toprak's gapping Bautista, so it doesn't look like they're that close out on the track. Although they haven't been generally in 2025, have they work to do for Bautista to try and haul back in Toprak, and of course Niccolo Bulock as well. Anyway, this time last year, or a little bit later in the year last year, Bautista clearly seemed to, on pace terms, have the upper hand over Bulock, and what a difference less than 12 months makes.
Yeah, and it's where Alvaro has very clearly been usurped at Ducati, and he's having to try and react to that, try and figure out a solution for him. And at least for Alvaro, in today's running, he's been able to show some decent pace and consistency, but obviously still not quite enough. And the big challenge is to be able to make sure that you're able to claw back some points against Bulock and give yourself a chance to be able to challenge at the front. It's very difficult to look past Razgatlioglu for this weekend if we end up with dry conditions all the way through, though. But for Bautista, it's a chance to maybe make up some points on his teammate.
So, through your 3-2-1, as always, after free practice 2, this is Alex Lowe's 3rd fastest this afternoon, 1 minute 31.607. His teammate Axel Bassani also finishing well, 7th place for him, 131.738. This is Sam Lowe's 2nd place for Sam, 131.542, so just over 2 tenths as well, slower than Toprak Razgatlioglu, less than a tenth faster than his brother Alex. And Toprak Razgatlioglu takes P1 in FP1 and P1 in FP2. And after topping this morning's session by over half a second, he finds another 3 tenths faster this afternoon, despite the weather conditions in the build-up to FP2. Good going again from Toprak.
Yeah, Toprak just looks so good, and what we saw from him again in this session, we'll see it with the analysis in just a moment. He went out there, did a full race simulation. He's got the information for tomorrow.
So Razgatlioglu making his way back towards the pits then at the end of this free practice 2 session. Let's take a look at your results in full. Demanding day for the riders, but 22 of them have made it to the end. Razgatlioglu fastest ahead of Sam Lowe's and Alex Lowe's. And then another 3 Ducatis, Liner Stern, Bulock, Bautista and Petrucci. Niccolo Bulock doing well to get in 16 laps in total in free practice 2 this afternoon after his earlier crash. Bassani 7th place. Andrea Locatelli, top Yamaha, a little bit on the back foot so far. Jonathan Ray in 13th, did eventually finish ahead of Bahatin Safoglu, but it was a good morning for Bahatin. Every rider improving compared to their times from FP1 this morning. Stint summary then, and a nice long first run for Toprak Razgatlioglu, and look at the lap time, still strong at the end. 1:31.531 there, close to the end of the stint. 1:31.575, the last of a 17-lap stint, and it's still faster than any other rider went in that session. Sam Lowe's 1:31.542 for him in his second stint. And finally, Alex Lowe's decent first run and 1:31.607, and Alex as well posting his fastest time towards the end of that stint. Sector summary. Now, Nicolo Bulock was able to be fastest in the opening sector. Toprak Razgatlioglu had 3 of the 4 this morning, only 2 of the 4 this afternoon, sectors 2 and 3 around the middle of the lap, but he was only 0.02 of a second short of Bulock in sector 1. Sector 2, he finishes ahead of Andrea Locatelli and Axel Bassani. Sector 3 ahead of Alex Lowe's and Alvaro Bautista. Not much to choose between the entire pack through the middle of the lap, but it's Razgatlioglu with the advantage there. And then Sector 4, Sam Lowe's fastest in that one, ahead of Axel Bassani and Nicolo Bulock. So Razgatlioglu 2,000 slower in Sector 1, fastest in Sectors 2 and 3, and that's where his advantage stems from. That's all for Friday here in Moss. Tomorrow we start at the usual time, 11 AM for Super Pole, with race 1 3 hours later. Join us then.